In this video, I'm going to name every NFL team's worst quarterback ever. The conundrum here is that the truly worst quarterbacks don't usually see the field that often, so I'm going to set some qualifiers. Every quarterback on this list had to throw at least 224 pass attempts with that franchise. Why 224? Because for years, that was the minimum amount of passes a quarterback needed to qualify for statistical categories during a season. I am only considering how these quarterbacks played for that franchise alone. I also, of course, took the era they played in into account. Without further ado, let's begin. Arizona Cardinals, Ryan Lindley. God bless Ryan Lindley, who seems like a great guy, but my God, he might legitimately be the worst NFL quarterback I've ever watched in real time. The most incredible part about Lindley's career is that he got to start a playoff game thanks to massive amounts of injuries. He unsurprisingly lost that game while putting up terrible numbers and appeared in just one more game before his playing career ended. Atlanta Falcons, Kim McQuilkin. Even for the 1970s, McQuilkin's numbers were beyond atrocious. It also speaks to how bad the Falcons' quarterback situation was at the time that he somehow lasted 4 years with the team and started games in 3 of them. It's actually a miracle the guy somehow won 2 games as a starter. Imagine how useless the players who lost to him feel. Tough scene. Baltimore Ravens, ELVIS GRBAC. GRBAC was signed by Baltimore fresh off of their Super Bowl win in 2000 and was seen as an upgrade over the departed Trent Dilfer. Well, as it turns out, he wasn't. GRBAC only lasted 1 year in Baltimore, putting up shitty numbers. Of course, thanks to the still elite Baltimore defense, they made the playoffs, but failed to repeat as champs after GRBAC shit his loafers versus Pittsburgh in the divisional round. He never played in the NFL again. Buffalo Bills, Dan DARRAGH. DARRAGH might have thrown an almost unfathomable 4 touchdowns to 22 interceptions in 3 seasons with the Bills, but at least they didn't waste a high draft pick on him. In DARRAGH's defense, maybe he was too distracted by teammate O.J. Simpson's incredible class and respect for women to focus on becoming a good quarterback. Yeah, let's go with that. Carolina Panthers, Jimmy CLAUSEN. CLAUSEN was once seen as the next superstar quarterback in high school, and after a good but underwhelming career at Notre Dame, he got to start a lot of games as a rookie in Carolina. He was so terrible that he led the team to the first overall pick, which they used to draft his replacement in Cam Newton. CLAUSEN would later go on to suck major ass with Chicago and Baltimore too. Very versatile. Chicago Bears, Gary Huff. Rest assured, the Chicago Bears have had so many terrible quarterbacks over the years, it's hard to single out just one, but I went with Huff, who threw 12 touchdowns and 34 interceptions in 4 years with the team. It's made even worse by the fact that Huff was a relatively high draft pick, 33rd overall. Huff would leave Chicago and spend 2 years with the expansion Buccaneers, where he would throw 4 touchdowns and 16 interceptions. Pretty rough. Cincinnati Bengals, Achilles Smith. The absolute worst possible scenario for an NFL franchise is to have a bad quarterback that they either spent a lot of money on in free agency or drafted very high. Smith falls into the latter category, as he was the 3rd overall pick in 1999. He proceeded to play 4 years in Cincy, putting up just 5 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. He never once looked like he belonged on an NFL field. Truly an awful player in every way. Cleveland Browns, Mike Phipps. You might be shocked to not see Tim Couch, Brady Quinn, Johnny Manziel, or Brandon Weeden here, but none of them were as bad as this guy was for as long. Phipps was an objectively terrible quarterback by every measure, yet thanks to his draft status, 3rd overall pick, he lasted 7 seasons in Cleveland, starting in 4 of them, in which he combined to throw 35 touchdowns, 72 interceptions, and a 51.3 passer rating. Overall, he lasted 12 years in the NFL and finished with 55 touchdowns and 108 interceptions. Yeah, gross, I know. Dallas Cowboys, Chad Hutchinson. Hutchinson was extremely versatile. He was terrible at pro baseball, so he decided to play pro football, and he was terrible there as well. He played just 2 years in Dallas and was in a QB competition the entire time with a slightly less shitty but still very shitty quarterback in Quincy Carter. Either way, Hutchinson finished his Cowboys career with 7 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and a 2-7 record. How about them Cowboys, am I right? Denver Broncos, George Herring. I'm willing to bet, unless you're a Broncos fan over 70, you've never heard of George Herring before. There are 2 main reasons for this. The first is that he played just 2 years in the early 1960s for the expansion Broncos. The second, and more prominent reason, is that he was absolutely atrocious. He finished his 2-year NFL career throwing 5 touchdowns to 23 interceptions and a 29.3 rating. Rest in peace, though. Detroit Lions, Mike McMahon. Ah, yes, Mike McMahon. I remember this guy from my Eagles' doomed 2005 season where he replaced an injured Donovan McNabb and started 7 extremely painful games. It turns out he was doing that for a few years in Detroit, too. In 4 years with the Lions, he shifted back and forth between starter and backup for fellow shit quarterback Joey Harrington. He finished with 10 touchdowns and 13 interceptions for a 55 passer rating and a laughable 43.8% completion percentage. Gross. Green Bay Packers, Jerry Tagge. You might not believe it, since Green Bay has been saddled with back-to-back Hall of Fame quarterbacks for the last 30 years, but there was once a span between Bart Starr and Brett Favre where they mostly churned out dog shit at the quarterback position. Tagge TAGGE was drafted 11th overall in 1972 to be the next Bart Starr, when it turns out he ended up being more like Fart Star. Get it? Because he stunk like a fart? I'm doing my best here, guys, alright? TAGGE finished his 3-year career with 3 touchdowns and 17 interceptions. Pew. Houston Texans, Brock Osweiler. Ah, yes, here is one most NFL fans will remember. The good old Brock Lobster parlayed a decent half season behind a legendary Super Bowl winning defense in 2015 into a massive contract with the QB-hungry Texans. In just 1 year with Houston, Osweiler was laughably bad, but thanks to Houston's elite defense, he somehow made the playoffs and even won a playoff game against Connor Cook. Then he got destroyed versus New England the next week and was traded to Cleveland. Handsome guy, though. Indianapolis Colts, Curtis Painter. I'll always remember Curtis Painter for looking like an alcoholic version of Kurt Cobain. So, on second thought, really just Kurt Cobain. Painter instilled fear into people every time he stepped onto an NFL field. Unfortunately, those people were fans of the team he was playing for. He sucked in a few brief appearances late in 2009 to ruin Indianapolis' perfect season, and he sucked in 2011 replacing an injured Peyton. He then sucked in a few brief appearances with the Giants in 2013. Overall, he just sucked harder than Jenna Jameson in her prime. Jacksonville Jaguars, Blaine Gabbert. Gabbert was drafted 10th overall in 2011 to be Jacksonville's franchise quarterback, and, well, let's just say that didn't pan out the way anybody hoped. He lasted just 3 seasons in Jacksonville due to his terrible play, finishing with 22 touchdowns, 24 interceptions, and a 66.4 rating. He also went 5-22 in 27 starts. Ever since then, he's somehow managed to bounce around the league, collecting checks as a spot starter/backup, and he even won a Super Bowl with Tampa in 2020. Maybe he'll finally get a chance to start for Tampa when Tom Brady retires for good in 2050. Kansas City Chiefs, Brodie CROYLE. First off, just want to give Brodie props for his smoking hot wife. A very respectable woman. Okay, now let's get to his play on the field. He started just 10 games in 5 years with KC, throwing 8 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, and going 0-10. That's right, he didn't win a single game. Why is it always the shittiest NFL quarterbacks who have the hottest wives? Las Vegas Raiders, Andrew Walter. Yes, that's right, the Raiders have employed a quarterback worse than Jamarcus Russell, which is obviously no small feat. No offense to Rex Ryan. That quarterback's name is Andrew Walter, who finished his terrible NFL career with 3 touchdowns and 16 interceptions for a comically bad 52.6 passer rating. He also went 2-7 as a starter, and even that surprises me. How the fuck did 2 NFL teams lose to this guy? They should be arrested immediately. LA Chargers, Ryan Leaf. Pretty easy choice here. Not only the worst quarterback in Chargers history, but probably the worst quarterback in NFL history, and maybe the worst draft bust in sports history. It's still baffling to think how a guy who was viewed as a potential superstar quarterback flamed out so badly in such a short amount of time. He finished his Chargers career with 13 touchdowns, 33 interceptions, and a 48.8 passer rating with a 4-14 record. At least he's finally gotten his life together. LA Rams, Nick Foles. Yes, that's right. Big Dick Nick finds his way onto this list, further showing why he's had one of the weirdest careers in sports history. He got traded to St. Louis in 2015 with high expectations, and he completely shit the bed, throwing 7 touchdowns and 10 interceptions and getting benched for Case Keenum. He only lasted 1 year there before being cut. It's incredible to think just a few years later he would win Super Bowl MVP against Belichick and Brady's Patriots. Miami Dolphins, Rick Norton. Norton was a pretty highly touted prospect for the expansion Miami Dolphins in 1966, and he would end up being one of the worst quarterbacks ever. In 4 years with Miami, he started just 11 games, going 1-10, and finishing with a vomit-inducing 6 touchdowns, 30 interceptions, and 28.1 passer rating. I'm not even sure how that's possible. How did nobody stop this from happening? Minnesota Vikings, Christian Ponder. Remember when I said shitty NFL quarterbacks always get the hottest wives? Ponder is further proof of that. Drafted 12th overall in 2011 to be the franchise quarterback for Minnesota, he ended up being one of the worst starters in football for 3 years before spending his 4th season mostly on the bench. He finished with 38 touchdowns, 36 interceptions, and a 75.9 passer rating, which are arguably the best numbers of every quarterback on this list. He did a great job handing the ball off to Adrian Peterson, though. Can't deny that. New England Patriots, Doug Flutie. Before he went on to become a legendary CFL quarterback and reignite his NFL career in Buffalo, Flutie was a shitty quarterback in New England who was so small you could fit him into your pocket. In his first stint with New England from 1987 to 1989, he threw 11 touchdowns, 14 interceptions for a dreadful 61.2 rating. He would actually return to New England in 2005 for his final season, where he famously executed a dropkick in a meaningless late regular season game. New Orleans Saints, Danny Wuerffel. Like Flutie, Wuerffel is a former Heisman Trophy winner. Unlike Flutie, there would be no second act of redemption in the NFL for Wuerffel, who spent 3 years in New Orleans and put up vomit-worthy stats of 9 touchdowns, 16 interceptions, and a 51.2 passer rating. He completed under 50% of his throws and was sacked on an astounding 15% of his dropbacks. He stunk so hard he earned the name Danny Woeful. New York Giants, Joe Pisarcik. Pisarcik lives on in NFL lore for his infamous gaffe late in a 1978 game versus Philadelphia that's now known as the Miracle in the Meadowlands. But hey, did you also know Pisarcik also just sucked in general? He somehow started 27 games for the Giants across 3 seasons and racked up 18 touchdowns to 43 interceptions for a comical 46.3 rating. The biggest surprise is that he somehow won 8 games there. Whoever lost to him should be ashamed. New York Jets, Bryce Petty. There have been many shitty Jets quarterbacks over the years, and who knows, maybe Zach Wilson will earn this distinction someday, but for now, it belongs to Petty, who finished his forgettable NFL career with just 4 touchdowns to 10 interceptions and a 57.7 rating. He also went 1-6 as a starter. This was the crap quarterbacks the Patriots got to face for almost 20 years in a shitty AFC East. Makes me sick. Philadelphia Eagles, King Hill. No, not King of the Hill. The guy's name was actually King Hill, and he stunk at playing quarterback, despite being the first overall pick in 1958. After flaming out with the Cardinals, he lasted 8 years in Philly, mostly as a spot starter, and accumulated 29 touchdowns to 51 interceptions for a gross 54.8 rating. In those 8 years, he started just 18 games and went 5-12-1. If you're gonna go by the name King, at least make sure you're actually fucking good at what you do. Pittsburgh Steelers, Kent Nix. We think of the Steelers as one of the blue blood franchises of the NFL thanks to their consistent success since the 1970s. But before the 70s, they were seen as a joke, and bad quarterbacks like Nix were a big reason why. In 3 years in Pittsburgh, he threw 14 touchdowns, 33 interceptions for a 46 passer rating. He started 12 games and went 3-9. He would later go on to play for the Bears, who can't help but attract terrible quarterbacks. San Francisco 49ers, Ken Dorsey. If not for my attempts qualifier, I would have put Jim Druckenmiller here, but instead, Dorsey gets the spot. He had one of the best college careers of any quarterback ever, but it didn't translate to the pros at all. In 3 years with San Fran, he started 10 games, going 2-8, and throwing 8 touchdowns to 11 interceptions for a 63.7 rating. Such a hard worker, though. Seattle Seahawks, Kelly Stouffer. Stouffer's career is hilarious. He was drafted 7th overall in 1987 by the Cardinals, but refused to play for them, so he sat out a year until he was traded to the Seahawks, where he proceeded to suck major ass. In 5 years with Seattle, he started 16 games, going 5-11 and throwing just 7 touchdowns to 19 interceptions for a minuscule 54.5 rating. He would never play another down in the NFL again once leaving Seattle. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Bruce Gradkowski. I want to give a shout out to Randy Hedberg, who in just 90 passes in 1977 threw 0 touchdowns and 10 interceptions for the Bucs. Unfortunately, he didn't meet my attempt qualifiers, so the honor goes to Gradkowski instead. In 2 years with Tampa, Gradkowski threw 9 touchdowns to 10 interceptions for a dreadful 65 passer rating. He started 11 games and went 3-8. He managed to carve out an 11-year NFL career mostly holding a clipboard. Good for him, I guess. Tennessee Titans, Lynn Dickey. Dickey would eventually go on to be an exciting gunslinger who had some good seasons for the Packers in the early to mid-80s, but his time with the then Houston Oilers was dreadful. In 5 years there, he started just 10 games and threw 8 touchdowns to 28 interceptions for a 43.2 rating. He's one of those guys who kind of slips through the cracks of history. Washington Commanders, Ralph Guglielmi. Ralph Guglielmi sounds like a Sopranos character, but really he was just a shitty NFL quarterback from the 50s and 60s. Drafted 4th overall by Washington in 1955, he never came close to living up to the high expectations. In just 4 years with Washington, he started 21 games, going 5-13-3. He threw for 17 touchdowns and 40 interceptions for a 43.5 passer rating. Very, very stinky.